Pat's going out, you guys. Let's go see him.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to my first time on the track in a Swift DB1. I've always wanted to drive David Brunn's first creation. This was his first design, which was Formula Ford. And back in the day when I was racing, I remember when this car debuted, and it changed everything. It was such a leap from everything else that was out there on the track. Now, of course, new racing cars do that all the time. New car comes out and it outdates everything. This was different. It crushed everything. The Swift was so aerodynamically clean, such a compact package, and so radically different that everybody else was way behind. And if you wanted to win, you had to have a Swift. It was so crushing to everything out there that the SCCA wound up making two classes, one for the older cars and one for the more modern that followed the Swift. So anyway, it's a terrific car, very strong, very robust design, lots of triangulation in the frame, lots of driver protection. I remember having a conversation with Pat Prince, the fabricator, and he said he had one in the frame jig that he had built for Swift chassis that had done a 3-rotation barrel roll. And he said it fit right in, bolted right up, wasn't tweaked in the slightest. So to me, it sounded like a good, strong, safe car that was going to be competitive for a long time. And sure enough, almost 30 years later, Swift DB1s are still winning races in the SCCA. But I got this one because, well, they're vintage eligible, and so am I. And I'd like to do a little vintage racing. But before I tear the thing down and do a complete rebuild, I decided I would rent the track for half a day and put in a few laps on what I'm calling a play day. It isn't a testing session. It's certainly not a practice session. It's just go out and play with a Formula Ford. So we cobbled together a seat. My daughter and I worked together and went through the car from one end to the other and made sure everything was good. And took it out to the track on a cold April morning. And we had from 9 until noon. Now on that day, there were other cars. There were closed wheel cars there and no other open wheel cars. So they divided it into two sessions, even though I told them, hey, I can I can ride with these guys. I'm not worried about being out there with closed wheel cars, but they gave us two different sessions, which means I really only had 3 opportunities at the track for the day. So this is the first one, and we got the engine warmed up, got myself strapped in, and went out and did basically 5 exploratory laps. And my plan was to come in and have Lavinia check for any leaks or anything out of the ordinary, and then I'd go ahead and start playing. So I headed out onto the track. First thing you notice as I'm coming down the pit lane here is I managed to put the steering wheel on slightly off center. So everything was pointing to the right a little bit, but that's no big deal because, like I said, I wasn't planning on going fast. The Swift, like most Formula Fords, on a good day it makes 110, 120 horsepower. The more modern engines, which this one has with an aluminum head and an updated crank, probably make a little bit more than that, but not a great deal of horsepower. The car weighs in at a slight 1,100 pounds. These are modern Hoosier radial racing tires, which I've never driven on radials. And from what I was told, if you just gently turn the car in, they say turn in slowly and let the tires do the work. And I was kind of anxious to see how that would work. I was told that you really don't pitch the Swift into the corners, and that defies everything I remember about the car, because I remember watching guys driving them, and boy, it seemed like they were pitching them around to me. I don't know, we'll see, but I don't have a lot of time at Gateway. A couple years ago, I did a shifter kart race weekend, and there was a race on Saturday and a race on Sunday. The good news was I got second both days, and at the end of the weekend, I was leading in the points. But that was the only race I did that year, so my points lead didn't last very long. But anyway, it gave me a chance to get to know the track at least a little bit. But I still felt like I was a little out of place. I just don't have a lot of track time on there, and I'm sitting probably a foot higher than I was when I was in the kart. and surrounded by metal and all that sort of thing. So it's just a lot of getting used to everything. But decided to go out, do a few laps, and see how things shake out just by watching the gauges. This corner I'm going into here was just absolute terror in the shifter cart because the transition between the banking of the oval and going into the infield road course, extremely bumpy. I could not, the whole weekend, I never did find a way to cross over there without getting off the ground. And your visor would fly up and your teeth would chatter, and it was really rough. In fact, I broke the exhaust support bracket at the end of the Saturday race and had to repair it overnight for Sunday. That was really, really rough track. Not so bad when you have a car with suspension like the Swift, but the kart extremely bumpy. I'll talk through a lap here a little bit later once I get up to speed, but I really like what Bruce Pellman did with the infield section of this race course. Bruce is a civil engineer who laid out the old track that was on the same piece of property and did a tremendous job using a drag strip and turning it into a road course. He did the same thing here. Very, very challenging set of corners on the infield. Last year when the IndyCars came, they made some kind of deal and got all new pavement on the banking and the oval all the way around. And I mean, it was like driving on a billiard table. Absolutely perfectly smooth all the way around. I got high once up into the dirt and I thought I was going to slide on the road. For the most part, just stayed on the road. The other cars were By the way, I had a self-imposed 5,000 RPM rev limit on this first outing, just to get acquainted with where things were in the car, changing gears again, all that kind of stuff. I haven't driven a stick shift anything in I don't know how many years. Not that that's a big complicated part of it, but real short throw gearbox, this and a very tight foot box. Takes a little getting used to. So, anyway. See how the rest of the warm-up session goes. we're coming up on the end of the session here. This is my cool down lap, and as if I had gotten things hot, right? Bring it down here to the pit entrance at turn 3 on the oval. And, so far, everything was fine. Plenty of oil pressure the way it should be. Water temperature was just right at about 180. We had taped off one side of the radiators because it was such a cool day. But overall, I felt pretty good. And decided to just bring it in at the end of the session.
Go around. Do what? Oh, okay, so I go in that way?
Of course, this weekend and in the shop, I had the good fortune and blessing to have Lavinia helping me. She's an interesting person, my daughter. She takes an interest in things she doesn't know anything about and is willing to learn, and most important, is willing to take instruction. And whatever I tell her to do, she follows the instructions to the letter. And the more accurate I am, the better she is. And anyway, I just couldn't be more pleased about her attitude towards the whole thing. And of course, with Lavinia, you always have fun.
Look going down the straight.
I did have some sort of problem with the left front brake hanging up, and it was dragging. In fact, when we came in, it was difficult to push the car because that one brake was dragging. Here's one of the NASA guys who came over with a can of brake clean and was spraying it on the caliper, and I would pump the brakes and loosen things up a little bit. And we thought that the problem had taken care of itself, which is never true, it seems. But guy was a good guy. It reminded me so much of the old days in racing where people helped each other. And, anyway, but he sprayed a little brake clean on there, and we thought, okay, we're good. Let's see what the next session brings.
Here and just drive. Come all the way back to the front. Come out here. Okay. Am I green?
Well, for this second session, I have every intent of picking up the pace a little bit, so I decided it was important to have the steering wheel on straight. Didn't want to pull a Tom Sneva and try and put it back on while I'm driving, so I just stopped in the pit lane, and everything seemed to true up after that. I thought, oh, that's a good omen. Time to get out here and start using the extra RPMs that I have. guys were starting to pick up the pace just a little bit. Don't expect me to break any records today. Let's talk through a lap. Gateway is best known as an oval, and coming down the front straightaway here, you veer into the infield before you get to the turn 1 oval section. There's a big bump going through there. You hit a quick downshift, and it's a very late apex. And you're apexing here and swinging out, and now you're into the back part of the course. Coming up on a set of S's, which is turns 3 and 4, I believe. 3, 4. You immediately have a little bit of a rise in the roadway here, and you have to cross over and get ready for 5. Let's see if I've got this number count 6. Correct. Into turn 6. This is a long, long neck stretcher of a corner with a very, very late apex. Quite honestly, when I was running the kart here, I never really did get that corner very well. Got to make sure you hit the apex late or you wind up out in the grass, which I did once in the kart. Turn 8 here, coming on to the oval again. Another late apex, but a really neat corner. I like it. There's reference points going into it, which I like. Here it's best to keep the car down near the line. And throughout the sessions, I was slowly working my way up in steady RPMs through that section that we just went through. I started out at 5,000 RPMs, and I went to 5,100. Eventually I got to around 5,600. I think if the car was set up right, and if I was really driving it hard, you could probably come out of turn 8 and accelerate through that corner as hard as you possibly can to get plenty of speed down the straightaway. Didn't see any reason to try and do that today, just because this is a play day, and I'm going to take the car home and I'm going to go through it from one end to the other. Keep in mind we did have that little brake problem, and the idea of locking up one of the front brakes and sending me into the fence was kind of top of mind through this session. I just didn't want to take the chance on pushing things too hard. So anyway, that's a lap around Gateway, just briefly. And also, you noticed in the soundtrack, every time I go through the turn we just went through, the soundtrack sounds a little funny. The camera I'm using is a Replay XD Prime X, and it has a metal housing, which is why I bought it. I think it's a great camera in its construction compared to the GoPro. And but every time that metal touched the bar that you see in the foreground here, which is grounded to the chassis, the ignition would put interference into the soundtrack, which sounded terrible. I tried to null it out, but anyway, if the soundtrack sounds funny, you understand why.
This is like a half-hour session, so we're only 15 minutes into it, and I'm wearing his glasses. They're pretty cool looking, aren't they? You probably can't hear me because it's so windy, but yeah, I'm
At the end of this session, that's when we discovered the left front brake rotor was hanging up seriously. And even though we got it freed up again, I thought, you know what, I'm just not going to risk it. I only had 15 minutes to work on the car before I go out for another half-hour session, and I just waved it off. I thought, you know what, I've had my fun, I played with it, it's time to take it home and make it right. And so here ends my one track day or half day in the car, and I had a hell of a good time. And very, very grateful to my daughter and my wife and Performance Products Distributors, my sponsor, which I own. Anyway, hopefully I'll see you back at the track in a year.
I'm done. I'm done. Okay. You can unbelt.